So how do I get a virtual background? Oh, no. I don't know why it's not giving me an option.
Good afternoon, everyone. I hope everyone is keeping well. I just want to welcome everybody to KCDF's 25th anniversary online webinar. Thank you so much for not only keeping time, but actually coming before time. We appreciate that. I just want to quickly just say hello to some of the panelists. I just want to do a quick mic and video check for Grace and Mary. Grace, good afternoon.
Afternoon, Natasha.
Loud and clear?
Yes, you can hear me?
Yes.
Great,
Mary,
thank you.
Thank you, Grace. Mary, Living Positive, you can hear me?
Yes, I can hear you. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon, how are you?
Good.
Great, thank you so much. We'll give it a few more minutes. And thank you to the participants as well. Kindly use the chat box in terms of introducing yourself, your name, the country you are representing, as well as the organization you are you're representing as well. Thank you so much. Karibuni, welcome.
Hello, hello.
Good afternoon, Jimmy. Welcome.
Hi.
Hi, hello. Jessica, welcome as well. It's great to see you. Eliza Fan as well, welcome. Thank you to the participants as well in joining in early. I just wanted to do a quick mic check for Jessica. If we can hear you. Can hear us? Great.
Yeah, I can hear you fine if it's clear.
Fantastic. Thank you so much. Jenny as well, we can hear you and see you very
Great.
well. Good afternoon, everyone. Hello, Irungu.
Hi, everybody.
Hello, everyone. I just wanted to do a quick mic check and see you and hear you. I hope you can hear me quite well. Great. Elizaphan, karibu sana. I
Hello,
just
can
want to see you and hear you. Elizabeth, I don't know if I heard you quite well. Hello, good afternoon.
Well done to you. These are fun.
Great, thank you so much.
Yeah.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you for keeping time and also just attending in good time. We'll allow to start in the next 3 minutes, top of the hour, we will begin. In the meantime, kindly allow me to also introduce or have a quick mic check with Robert Wiggles. Welcome. Hello.
Hi,
Good
Natasha.
afternoon. Hi, you can hear me well?
I can hear you well, yes.
Fantastic. Thank you so much. Everybody, welcome to KCDF's 25th anniversary online webinar. We are happy to have you with us. Thank you so much. We'll give it another 2 minutes and we begin at the top of the hour. In the meantime, welcome. Thank you.
Great, and good afternoon, good evening, and good morning to some of you. Welcome to this wonderful celebratory event organized to really pay tribute to the energy and the movement that Kenya Community Development Foundation has become. And for some of you who were there on the 20th anniversary, you are probably kind of having a bit of a moment, just thinking, what happened the last 5 years? Well, we'll get a chance to talk about that as well. My name is Irungo Houghton, and I serve Amnesty International Executive Director. I also volunteer in my local community, an organization called the Kilimani Project Foundation, and of the facilitation team for this afternoon. I'm going to start off essentially by just giving some guidelines. First of all, feel free to introduce yourselves using the chat function. Perhaps you can share your name, the organization, and where you're currently joining us from. If you would like to say something celebratory to the KCDF team, of whom I hope we're all part of, do that as well. For those of you who are Twitterati and slightly addicted to the social media space, hopefully not trolling anybody, but really engaged in this process, we call, I guess, digital activism these days. Let me invite you just to tweet about this event, and if I can request you to use the hashtags. So the first hashtag is @KCDFAT25, and the second hashtag is the hashtag that many of you are familiar with, and that's Shift the Power. So once again, hashtag KCDF@25, and the second hashtag is @Shift the Power. Take a minute to do that, and let's speak to some of the communities that follow us. And there's room for standing at the back, I guess, in this context. So I'm going to kick off very quickly and just invite people, please mute your mics if you're not speaking. We will use the hand function on Zoom if you want to ask a question or you want to engage. But if you can also switch off your cameras if you're not presenting or if you're not facilitating at the particular time. And that will just allow those of us who are grappling with all kinds of bandwidth and have fun. I guess by way of setting the scene for this, for some of us, 25 years is what we would call the silver jubilee. It's big enough really to kind of just exponentially grow the whole birthday card industry. Something like 6 billion shillings, $6 billion is what they spend on birthday cards. And at this point, if you haven't sent your card over to KCDF, you're probably doing poorly. But for cultures like my own, among the Agekuyu, for example, 25 years is actually a very important milestone, because what it marks really is a generational shift from elders to the warriors. I think as we go into this conversation this afternoon, we want to really have this sense of history and a sense that we are living and creating this history, not just for KCDF, but for ourselves as well. So I would start there. I'm going to take a minute to introduce the KCDF Executive Director. And in particular, I just wanted to, in this moment, partly because, like a good silver jubilee, I have, I've got the right hairdo to just indicate that I may have been around for a little bit longer than KCDF. But, in moments like this, we have to remember Monica Matuko. We have to remember Janet Mwiu, who stepped down a year ago. And with that handover of power to Grace Maingi Wakesho, let me just welcome Grace to give us an opening address and just welcome us. Karibu, Grace.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Irungu, and good day to everyone who's joining us from across the world. We really do appreciate the time that you've taken to be with us this afternoon. And on my own behalf, on behalf of the trustees of KCDF, the directors and the staff and management, I really want to welcome you to this session this afternoon in Kenya. It's been a long time in planning. We have been very excited for this event, planning it since last year. And we recognize that we are doing things differently this year. Unfortunately, because of the COVID-19 pandemic, we're not able to meet together as we had done during the 20th anniversary. But we do hope that through a series of online interactions and one in-person event for those who will be in Kenya, you will still feel the sense of celebration and the joy that we have as the KCDF family. I want to recognize the presence of some of our trustees who are online. I've seen Arthur Namu, who's online, and to welcome all the other trustees and directors who are online today. Looking back in terms of who KCDF is and what we've been able to do, as Irungu has said, everyone who is participating on the panel today and as a presenter has played a significant role in the story of KCDF. Even for our facilitators, you'll be meeting Jenny a bit later on. She was there right at the beginning. Irungu was there with us when KCDF started in the 90s. And so it's such an important and such a privilege to have them with us today. Ford Foundation, the Aga Khan Foundation, as those of you who know the history of KCDF, really put together the building blocks. And we wanted to share with you our story, even as we welcome you to this webinar. So for those who may not know, our vision and our mission is community-centric. And that is why we have focused on ensuring that for this first webinar, we make sure that we have community voice, even as we discuss shifting the power. We want to see flourishing and resilient communities. And we thought, what no better way to do this than to invite partners who we have worked with to be able to share their story, how they've been able to flourish and how they've been able, even in these uncertain times, to really build resilient communities. Looking at our mission, we want to promote social justice and sustainable development for communities. And so we hope that today you will be able to be part of that story and even take it forward. In 1995, there was a birth of a dream. And in 1997, that is when really the seeds germinated in terms of the vision for KCDF. And so we have been privileged enough to be able to document our story. I invite you to go to our website where we have a documentation around the KCDF story right from the beginning. We wanted to share some photos as we reminisce. This here is the initial conversation, some of the initial conversations around sub-granting in 1998. And this is how far we've come. If you see this photo here also, again, in the formative years, with the support from the Aga Khan Foundation and Ford Foundation, KCDF really began just as a project. Some of you might see yourselves in that photo. And really that is where KCDF House was. At the back of that photo, if Natasha, you can go back, I want to just highlight the first, I don't know if it's very clear there, but the very first KCDF car, which was an Isuzu. So we have come a long way in our journey, and we really do appreciate all of you working and walking alongside us. In 1998, KCDF issued its very first grant, a sizable amount actually for that year of 842,000 Kenya shillings to the Welfare Advisory Committee. And we were privileged and blessed enough to actually appear in the newspapers as we were able to give out this grant. But where are we now? You can see the work that we've been able to do, even as we've faced the pandemic, being able to work with a diverse range of partners, those who work in the disability movement, work around livelihoods. We've worked with different communities that actually believe and walk alongside us around philanthropy. And so we wanted to use this opportunity to tell our story, to be able to welcome you to celebrate with us as we look back on 25 great years and as we plan for another 25 great years. So today, we hope that you will be able to see deeper our philosophy as KCDF. We really focus on shifting the power, and our current strategic plan focuses on ensuring that we are walking and working alongside communities, that they will be able to really hold decision makers accountable, but also look at how they can reshape funding modalities so that then the partners we work with are flourishing, that communities will realize improved quality of their lives through recognition of the investments in their own communities. And so you will see from a number of our programs and our projects, we do recognize that communities have resources that they bring to the table. How do we work alongside them to really make sure that they flourish? And importantly, the COVID-19 pandemic has taught us the importance of being resilient, the importance of ensuring that we make systems and processes that can withstand any challenges that we may have. If we could go back to the last slide, kindly. The former slide, Natasha, just around our philosophy. I just wanted to emphasize that point. So we don't only want to make sure that communities are using the resources they have, but really also want to make sure that they're resilient. But we recognize that we cannot do this on our own. And hence the reason why we partner with yourselves, we partner with the panelists, the facilitators that we have on this call, the presenters working together. For us, we recognize that communities, organizations at the local level, at the national level, at the international level, we all need to work together for us to ensure that we build flourishing and resilient communities. For those who have not had an opportunity to interact with us a lot, we do have various approaches that we undertake to be able to deliver this work. We ensure that we work alongside organizations, assist in securing their assets, in securing their work around community engagement and organizing. We have a heavy focus on ensuring that we build institutions, that we emphasize the need and the place for local philanthropy in our country, that through partnership and networking, we're able to influence policy so that then we can be able to see that the communities and organizations that we work with are really making the change that is required in our country and beyond. We do this by ensuring that we work together, that we are able to share the lessons that we have learned. And that's the purpose of this webinar today. We really wanted to elevate the voices of various community actors. Because of the limit of time, we'll be emphasizing or spotlighting 2 organizations. We want to challenge and further enrich ongoing conversations around Shift the Power that are robust across the globe. We want to make sure that we help those who are struggling with some of the concepts unpack the desired characteristics of shifted power. So making sure that we have perspectives, not only from national organizations like KCDF, but also from international funders who are also navigating the Shift the Power conversation. And finally, the most important thing, we want to grow the Shift the Power ecosystem. And so we welcome you at the end of this webinar to reach out to us for more information around Shift the Power. There's a large growing community globally. Lend your voice, lend your support to this work. And so I welcome you for our first webinar, and I hope that you will enjoy your time. You will ask us the hard questions that need to be asked, that you will share your experiences as well, and ultimately that we will all work together to ensure we have flourishing and resilient communities. Welcome everyone on behalf of the KCDF trustees, board, and management. Thank you very much, Irungu. Back to you.
Grace, and I just couldn't help but smile as I saw some of those photos. And I just hope that your communications team have the courage to just tweet or post some of those photographs. I can see a very younger Elkanah Odembo, and I thought I saw my co-facilitator, Jenny. Let's remind ourselves what they looked like a couple of years ago. So please do share all those photographs as possible. I think the second thing I wanted to do is just to run through the program for the afternoon. And we've got this, which is going to be led by 2 great presentations, perspectives on, again, I guess, how we increase the level of community engagement, community voice in shifting the power. And then we've got a lovely panel that's been put together. Some of the points that have been raised from the 2 presentations, and that panel will be led by Jenny Hodgson. And we will open up. My request and wish all is, if you have questions, keep them coming in the chat box, and we'll see if we can respond to them as we go along. So without any further ado, I'm going to now make the first of the 2 community-based empowerment perspectives. And what, now there couldn't be a better one to start off than the presentation by Mary Wanderi, who is the executive of Living Positive Kenya. And before Mary starts and I hand over to 3 days ago, we said goodbye to Dr. Joe Muriuki, the first Kenyan man who discovering his status, protecting status way back, probably around the same time that KCDF was being formed, walked to the Kenya Broadcasting Corporation studio and told to be positive. And imagine, for 3 decades, Joe continued to organize, educate, and it's really on the back of people like Joe that Mary continues to organize under Living Positive. Karibu, Mary, hearing from you. I have been warned very strictly. I will pass on that strict note that you have no more than 10 minutes to present. I will interrupt with the gentleness of a hammer in about 9.5 minutes. Karibu, Mary.
Asante. Yeah, thank you. Good afternoon, everybody. As you have heard, my name is Mary Wanderi from Living Positive Kenya. Living Positive is a program for women, vulnerable women, and especially those that are living with HIV, and we operate in Kajiado County. Our journey with the KCDF has been a long one. Congratulations on this 25 years. We started our first request for funding back in 2015, 2016, which our felt need then was classrooms. Our walls were falling off. We had little babies, some of them that are HIV positive, and we needed a cover up, and we approached them. It's been a journey since then. We've built quite a number of classes, and we are very, very honored to have had KCDF as our partner. Now, just like 3-4 years ago, we were called to KCDF offices, and we were told that trends are shifting, and we need to start thinking for organizations how we can now start having a change of mind on how we are operating in terms of shifting the power. And we got to be given the information on how that works. And we have tried since then just to see how does that work? What is that? What does that mean? And for us at Living Positive, we've looked at shifting power just as 2 words for us: empowerment and enablement. It's the process. It's a process just for empowering the communities as we were empowered and given this information. It's the same for the community. It's to empower them. It's to enable them to be able to identify their own problems and come up with viable, sustainable means, ways, approaches of how to address the problems. And we've been trying to do that, and in the process of doing that, I'll just give in a case scenario of our last funding, because it came from KCDF. Just after COVID, we realized that KCDF power during the COVID time, and especially the first 1 year, what they were doing is providing us with food, because that was the need. That's what the community had requested for, provided us for food to give to the community. And when we sat down, we realized how sustainable is this? How can we continue just handing over food? And we thought it's time to change. It's time to help the women come up and do different things. And the women came, and we had meetings and found out that what we need to do is restart our businesses. Most of our businesses had collapsed, and we needed to restart them. And we started a program called the Bounce Back. And that is the program I'll use today as a case scenario. So for this program, we had a number of activities that we have carried out. And one of the activities was just to train the communities to be independent, to work on their own, to do their own things. So we carried out a number of activities, and some of the activities that we did was business startups. We got the women together, let them identify their own businesses, come up with their own business plans, and together with KCDF helped them restart those businesses, just held their hand. Where is your gap? I know what I want to do. I know the kind of business I want to learn. I know what works for me. What I don't have right now are finances. So we got a number of businesses and we started them up. The other thing that we wanted to do, because we have always had a chicken project that we were learning prior, we wanted to do a chicken project for women. But to shift the power, we wanted to do it differently. What Living Positive has always done is kept the chicken in our farm, worked as an organization to run the chicken project for the people, and all the way to selling the chicken, then give the money for microfinances. But this time we wanted the women to do it for themselves. We wanted to empower them, to enable them do it for themselves. So the KCDF helped us get the money to source the chicken and hand them over to the women. And the women today are running their own chicken projects. We don't have to run it. It's much easier for us. And it's more dignified for them because they're making decisions. How much money do I put in my microfinance? How much money do I put in my business? How much money goes to my family? But in it, we needed to do a lot of trainings. So we had a lot of trainings going on. One of it was leadership. We wanted the women to have leaders because we wanted to offload policy making and decisions and meetings from the office. So we got a lot of leadership training where we put women together, got them to train on how to train others, on how to lead others, on how to carry out the group meetings. And we did a lot of registrations in it. Occasionally, we have just always operated on the Living Positive registration. But this time, we wanted the women to have the power, to have the registration, to have their own groups that are working, so that even if Living Positive is not there, they are able to operate. And we did a lot of group registrations. We had 6 groups that are registered in that process. And they are training today, they're handling in their meetings and doing their own microfinance. So all the microfinance groups are meeting. We don't have to be with the women during their meetings. They're making their own decisions. They know what activities they want to carry. They know what to do with their monies. All we did is get the money that we got from KCDF, write checks to the women. And the other thing we did do is help them open the bank accounts, show them how. Of course, a lot of this had a lot of its own challenges, but all in all, it has worked. One of the challenges is during the startup, the women did not have, for example, identity cards, PIN numbers. So there was that was dragging the implementation, but okay, eventually they were able to open the accounts, they were able to get the PIN numbers, which they will always have. And for me, that is really, really empowerment. Of course, there was also the feeling, which was also a challenge, the risk. We've taken the risk. We've transferred all the monies that KCDF has given us. We've written the checks to the women. Is the money safe? But the ownership, the dignity that it brought to the women, they still have their monies and they're carrying out their activities well. And we are very happy that that is happening. So there's a clip there. Natasha, you can go to that clip where the women are training on leadership. And for us, we thought that is really, really shifting power, where you put them together, only the group leaders, give them the training, and you off-road much of the responsibilities to them. They train others, and the microfinance groups are able to form. The women are continuing and forming groups now, just coming to us on where is our gap. This is what we need. This is what we need done, and this is what we are transferring to KCDF. So it's been awesome. It's been a lot of successes. As you can see, the next picture, we have Anne, who was working with Living Positive all her years. She depended on Living Positive getting money to give her money for her families. But during this, Anne decided, I want to become a businesswoman. That is what I've always wanted. My gap was to have the finances. And from the finances we got, we were able to get Anne start her own businesses. Today she's running this business. She's happy. and she doesn't have to depend on living positive for empowerment. She's making decisions for her own children. She's able to get her food. She's able to learn her own life without necessarily depending on the program. And for us, that has a lot of dignity. It has a lot of ownership. The other picture is just women learning their own microfinance and just counting on their money. All we have to do is help them know this is how you arrange it to go to the bank. And I have a feeling very soon we'll not even be doing that. They'll be able to come, fill out their banking slip, go to the bank, operate their own bank account, and be very, very grateful the way this has happened, how far it is gone. However, for in terms of accountability, whether you have shifted power, for us, it means that you're still responsible over the resources and over the stipulated resources that have been you have been given. But for us, what has really been helping is the fact that we had legally binding contracts. KCDF has always insisted on a contract. We have also understood what is our responsibility. What does it say? What does it say is our responsibility in the whole funding process? And that has helped a lot. We have also known that we have to do progressive reports. On the same note, we also have to get progressive reports from the groups of the women. So as we are being trained, we are training also, and we feel like it's equal partnership on both ends. It's equal partnership with us. We only have a contract that binds us. This is what you're supposed to do. This is what KCDF is supposed to do. This is what the community is supposed to do. There is a lot of unconditional support. It is not what KCDF wants. It's not what the donor wants. It's not what the donor has regarded as their own conditions and policies. It is what has come from the community. It is what has come from us, and that is what is funded, and that is what is being funded. It's the way we want to learn it. It's the way the community wants to learn it. So we feel it's very, very unconditional. We don't feel forced to do and to carry out activities that are not viable for us, that are not sustainable. There is also a lot of involvement, especially when we were doing a Pamoja for Change projects. There was a lot of involvement raising the funds because it's the 50-50 is on a 50-50, which also got you to feel on equal partnership. You raise half, we give you half. During this other funding, the Bounce Back project, it is also, we had to raise funds. We had the land, we have the equipment, and you are made to understand it's my own contribution too that counts, not just what the donor gives. My contribution also counts. Okay, there was a lot of financial obligations and accountability required from both ends, and that has really helped. There was, for the community too, it's helped us to be able to help them and to access information and knowledge, which they will keep forever. We've told them, they know how the groups are learned, they know how to learn a group. That is not something we'll take from them. Even when the funding expires, we'll not take away the information, the skills we've given them, the skills on how to rear their chicken, the information on how to learn groups, all that will not be taken from. It will help them even moving forward to other donors. And there's a lot of feedback coming. Yes?
Thank you. Let me just stop you there. That's okay. Just to, I want to give some time to Elizaphan to be able to also share some perspectives, if that's okay. And as we go into that, and just to thank Mary Wanderi for the presentation, she's made a lot of important points. I mean, I think the importance of a financial model that empowers and comes from below, delegating and I guess distributing power using registration. And I think the thing that really resonates for me was this idea, actually citizenship began to show up among the women of the project. They got to get a national ID. They got to get a Kenya Revenue Authority PIN. There are many things that we can learn from. Let me move to Guzo Africa. That is Elizaphan Ogechi, who's also for 10 minutes. just invite Elizabeth to take us through his presentation as well. Karibu sana.
Thank you, thank you. As you've been told, my name is Elizabeth Ugechi. I work for an organization called Nguzo Africa. We were established in 2011, and we work in the areas of empowering communities on the participatory governance, building economic opportunities, and tackling the issues of climate change. And we focus in the areas of agriculture, health, education, environmental conservation, and climate change mitigation. I think we are one of the children of KCDF, because when we met KCDF, we had just an idea, and we never had even a single system. Even we never had files for the organization, but they are the people who lifted us up to now. We are now trying to stand and be an organization, an entity doing a lot in development work. So what does shift the power means to us? It means changing the mindset on how development happens both at the donor giving side and the community receiving side here. The power means questioning the status quo regarding how sustainable development initiatives are thought, designed, and delivered, particularly in the areas where they are needed to. We are also trying to question the aid delivery models, how the global north agencies perceive themselves as solution providers of the challenges affecting the global south. So again, on civic, the power has given us a nice thinking on the lessons we've learned from COVID-19, which accelerated the need to focus on the people, communities, and local organizations who acted fast and provided quick solutions to the challenges of the pandemic. If you can see, the international organizations came late, or they not respond as quickly as the local organizations and the communities did during the time of the pandemic. Shifting the power to us also means adding value and being flexible, responsive, and innovative in the development agenda, not being receivers of aid, but also being contributors of aid for the well-being of our communities. It is about giving the power to communities to voice their needs so that the communities can say what they want. And it also means the communities' views, the communities' ideas are contributing the way they want their communities to address the issues that affect them. It means also going to communities so that they also give us the ideas on how they want the challenges of poor governance, the challenges of climate change, and how they want that to be addressed. To us, again, shift the power means empowering and connecting communities to appreciate their value, their assets, their culture, their resources, and the skills when it comes to sustainable development. We are working on this shift the power to prepare communities and organizations to be resilient, innovative, and capture the shift the power opportunities. Because we have seen that even development partners are changing this to accommodate the power ideas, where communities are supposed to be part and parcel of the development agenda. So on our field about the funders and how we work, and we've worked with a number of funders for quite some time, for the 10 years plus we've been on this space, and we've seen that there's funders who are patient, and those are the ones who have helped us to develop systems and the processes. But also there are others who have not done the same line. But what we have learned also through these funders who are patient, we have been able to build valuable relationships with them, and we are able to report with them and share opportunities that are helping us to move higher. However, there are some challenges where some intermediaries and funders are more concerned about their processes and also their funding to the funder, not focusing on the community, but also focusing on who funds them, ignoring the very people who are supposed to be funded. And also we've seen challenges, particularly on big funders who give this process of applying for grants or support, who becomes a tall order for small organizations, where you are given a lot of templates to fill so that you can qualify for funding. It becomes a very big challenge for small upcoming organizations with limited capacities in terms of staff and even resources. So we have seen that in the current state, currently the development arena is donor focused. And if you look at the funding value chain, we get that all less than 2% goes to communities. So the leading beneficiaries of the donor value chain are not the communities, but the system. On accountabilities, what we have seen, we've mainly committed in working with the communities through dialogues or in community dialogues and identifying their community priority needs, holding continuous awareness, networking and learning forums to address the key issues that affect the communities, equipping the communities, citizens with civic knowledge to undertake citizen audits on development. This is why it's very critical, particularly on the devolved system of Kenya, where we have been empowering citizens to voice up and influence how the counties are run through what we call citizen accountability forums and citizen audits, where they are able to put their leaders on check so that so much resources going to the communities are utilized. And also we have also tried to use technology so that the communities can capture their views and share them in form of e-petitions, so that the leaders can act, the duty bearers can act on some of the issues. So on our side, we are trying to push this agenda by learning from our authorities and the peers in this sector, and also creating awareness on
Elizabeth, let me just check. Yes?
Are you getting me?
We lost you for about 2 seconds.
I'm saying on the shifting the power, on pushing the agenda, we are learning from our peers and authorities in this movement, and we are continuing creating awareness at the community level about the shift agenda through the social media and holding community level forums. At the organization level, we've changed our strategy, and the shift power is part of our strategy, and we are applying it in all the aspect of our community programs delivery. And we have learned that being here has not been easy for us. It has been not easy. It is a marathon. There are times when we don't have funds. There are times when communities desist on providing support or contributing to our model, where we don't just give free things, but the community must contribute. Others have been so much used to free things until they refuse to contribute. We are also faced with the challenges of lack of resources to solve the increasing community needs and challenges. And there's also a perception that, that local organizations do not have capacity. And this has been a major challenge, particularly on small county-based organizations, which have been excluded from the development agenda for long, because nobody takes time to build their capacity so that they can come to the level of national or international organizations. And we believe that capacity is doable, and it can be built. So we also look at the way of finding innovative ways to address the sustainability challenges affecting local organizations in Kenya and even in Africa. So what are we seeing? What we want to see once this shift to the agenda movement will achieve is to flatten the power imbalance, particularly on our funding value chain is handled from the donor giving side up to the communities. We want to see local organizations who are funder ready and who can with the good systems to be supported, because we have seen some big organizations that are picking up on this idea. But do we have local organizations, good systems, who can be trusted, who can be honest, who can be transparent and deliver on the agenda movement? So we are also looking at the vulnerable communities becoming solution providers and not just receivers of donor aid. We want to see communities being part and partially on how sustainable development is done. This can lead to something which is tenable and sustainable, so that we avoid projects which are donor labeled project without community ownership, which leads to a lot of wastage and alienation of the communities. We want to see trust improved among the funders and the local organizations like us, so that we don't have the challenges of risk, which makes it very difficult for an NGO from the US or UK to fund a small organization here in Kenya. We want to see good organizations able to do the work the way it is supposed to be done with clear systems, and that will make it possible for big philanthropists to directly fund small organizations like in Nguzo Africa. We are looking forward to a true citizens' future, a trusted future. That's what we are looking for in this, the Shift the Power agenda. Thank you very much.
Wonderful, Alphonse. I can't, thank you very much to both you and also to Mary. I think what I picked from this is, the one lesson that we learned from COVID-19 is that to put our hopes, to put our very life state bureaucracies that are essentially captured by elites or by foreign diplomatic missions is extremely dangerous. So what I got from, and for those who are not familiar with perhaps the Bantu word nguzo, if it is not just a Kiswahili word, it means pillar. So pillars of Africa, very well described. And I think the other thing that you've shared with us, which is interesting, is the technology opportunities that opened up even with communities to be able to reach a much wider group of people. So thank the two of you. I'm hoping that the panel that is coming up, and it, as Jenny makes her way to the podium, let me just acknowledge first of all that we have 108 people with us this afternoon, morning or evening, depending on where you are. But if I could just single out a couple of people, just to single out the directors of KCDF. I think Seth Chandu, I see you. Tom Olila, Gordon Udundo, Aleke Donde. Where is that man? Aleke, not seen for so long. Just to thank you all for joining this afternoon. Of course, it is your celebration as much as anybody. And just to mention perhaps that Continental, where we held the last event 5 years ago, it didn't survive COVID-19, it closed. So obviously their directors didn't do as good a job as KCDF directors. And let me also just acknowledge Viju Ratansi, and I've done this already, but former executive director Janet Mawiu, and Stigmata Tenga, who holds the continent together when it needs it. Karibu. Over to you, Jenny.
Wonderful. Wow. Where to go with all of this? Great to see so many people here. Irungu, thank you. Elizabeth and Mary, thank you so much for setting up the conversation. I hope you don't mind me indulging myself perhaps, or you, with a little bit of reflection. Today we're looking at 25 years of the Kenya Community Development Foundation. I first heard of KCDF. Shall we remove the slide now so we can see each other? Otherwise I feel like I'm speaking into a void. Thank you so much. I was working in Russia in the late 1990s, and I'm sharing this today for obvious reasons of what's going on in the world. But I was working for an NGO in Russia that was, I was the only non-Russian working there. And we were looking at community philanthropy, ordinary people recognizing and organizing their resources as a critical piece of trying to hold up democratic governance and encourage citizen participation. My colleague, Olga Alexeyeva, who unfortunately passed away, was a real visionary, and she saw right back then what was already on the cards. What we're seeing today in Russia is the importance of structures that facilitate people, that can organize their voice, let them be heard, that we shouldn't just wait for the state or for the private sector or for international donors to solve things. And obviously today in Russia, we're seeing a very difficult and sad and terrible news. But at the same time, that you should know that there are 60 community foundations across Russia, all working in incredibly difficult circumstances as the state has decided that civil society is one of its many enemies, all working below the radar to organize and connect members of the community. And I just sort of wanted to add that context here, because this is really what this is all about. This isn't just about making development work less inefficient. This is about, as I think Mary and Elizabeth said, this is about organizing people so that they can start to be the people they want to be, to have the vision of the future that they want to have. I remember stepping into the KCDF office in 2000 in Pangani and just being blown away by the boldness of the idea that was KCDF. The idea that this could be an institution that was based on the idea of local resources, local philanthropy, and that put the capacitation of communities front and center. So I just wanted to add that little bit of context to say all of this work matters. We must preserve and protect these institutions. As COVID showed, this is what matters really when crisis happens. These are the institutions that we're left with. So we have a wonderful panel today, and we're going to move between local and global, and I hope you'll indulge us as we go. So I wonder if my panelists would switch their cameras on so I can see you all. Wonderful, thank you so much. We have Jessica Horn, who's joining us from the Ford Foundation, but she's much more than that. We have Robert Riggers, who's joining us from Wilde Hansen in the Netherlands, Elizabeth, who you've already heard from, Grace we've already heard from, and Mary we've already heard from too. So I wanted to start maybe with you, Jessica, because we've heard a lot, brilliant stories of what Shift the Power means to Mary and Elizabeth and their organizations. But I'd love to hear from you about what you've seen happened in the bigger system of international development and philanthropy, particularly over the last couple of years. And you've worked, you've had a brilliant position in different parts of the system. You'll work with the African Women's Development Fund, which is obviously a sister organization to KCDF, but you sat in different spaces. And I wonder if you could share what you've seen and why this conversation matters today, not just as a context of Kenya and communities in Kenya, but globally for us all. Jessica, please.
Thank you, Jenny, and also just happy birthday, and we're waiting for the cake. Yes, this is a really interesting question. I think it's a exciting historical moment, you know, despite the backdrop of the current war and the reality of Africans being highly involved in it because of the exclusions we're seeing at borders in Ukraine, etc. So, but you know, it's a sort of quite a tense moment. But if we think about it, I think one of the things that has happened as a result of social movement mobilization, I mean, I'd say since like 1960s, 70s, but really gathering pace in the past 2 decades, is just this acknowledgement that as the people from the disability community say, nothing about us without us, that, you know, for all of the issues that we deal with, people just saying it's no longer acceptable to do things on behalf of, that actually the constituencies that we're talking about are capable, and that we need to create the space and to recognize that there's the capacity and the agency for people to actually determine their own actions, priorities, and destinies, and therefore to also then better determine the resources that they govern. So I think that has been kind of like the movement. We saw it with the Women's Funds movement, which of course began with Mama Cash and then Global Fund for Women, and then that wave of sort of, you know, that saw the foundation of African Women's Development Fund, and we're seeing that renewed again with things like Frida, with the Black Feminist Fund, you know, that sort of wave of sort of reclaiming. So, I mean, we see that in terms of sort of a political agreement or political question about, you know, how we, who speaks on behalf of whom and who's deciding for whom. And I feel like the recognition of that is gathered pace. A second thing is the advocacy really around the way that work is resourced, because I think that, you know, there's an understanding now that project-based, very short-term, starving the core of organizing isn't actually a long-term recipe for change, but it's taken a lot of work. It's actually taken a lot of empirical work to substantiate that, to substantiate the lack of resources, to actually make people see, look, the truth of the matter is we don't have the money, that we're operating on budgets that are minimal compared to the scale of even the expected action that we take. It's been slow to catch on. I see it in pockets of philanthropy, but I actually think that where this call for core and multi-year and flexible needs to really be heard is actually in bilateral money. For the African region, a lot of the ways that people run their organizations are shaped by the imperatives of bilateral organizations, is the truth of the matter. And so if we have a situation where some donors are flexible, but then you have a sort of core of money going to development, democracy, etc., that is so restrictive in terms of how it works. It actually creates a little bit of a contradiction. And I also think that large scale philanthropy is another space that needs to also consider that, because the kinds of expectations that are put on people and the kinds of obligations and the projectitis mind frame really can't be shifted unless we all decide that we're going to shift it together. So I feel like, just in broad view, that's sort of how I see it. It's sort of been actually organized movements of people questioning how we're deciding, successes in terms of people opening their and creating their autonomous ways to do this, offering models for it, like participatory grant making, which really has come actually out of movement space, but also just that broader question of really asking the whole ecosystem to think about it and not just have groups of mavericks and experimenters working in this way that we know is a far better way to resource our work.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. Really rich input, Jessica. I think that that notion that this is a conversation that's been happening in some spaces for some time, and it seems to be gaining momentum. And it's great to have this call. We hear Elizabeth talking about current work is donor focused, and what you're suggesting is that sometimes donor work actually undermines other kinds of donor work, and that actually that's a contradiction there. I was on a call by the power of Zoom. I was in the Philippines this morning, and a network leader basically called out INGOs. She said, "You've destroyed the intangibles by paying people. You've undermined our culture of voluntarism, and you've forgotten the assets we already had." And this whole idea that actually if we're not pulling in the same direction, that we end up causing damage. Robert, I wonder, Jessica mentioned the role of bilaterals. I'd like to come to you next to sit from your position, your vantage point in the Netherlands, and particularly some of the work that the Dutch Foreign Ministry is funding around this. Could you talk a little bit about that, sort of building on what Jessica said? What are you seeing that's good and moving us in the right direction? And where are you seeing still we have a ways to go? Because the problem with shifting power is that we can all say it, but we all might mean completely different things, and saying it is not a substitute for doing it. So I'd love to get your perspective from where you sit.
Yes, thank you, Jenny. Well, the Dutch government, ever since 2006, has been funding programs, setting out calls for proposals that called for organizations to submit proposals that were trying to shift power, although in those days, back in those days, 2006, the word shifts the power were not utilized, but the basic intention was there. And my own organization, Wilde Ganzen, has been able to receive funding from the Dutch government ever since to promote domestic resource mobilization first, and then later on domestic resource mobilization in the Global South, combined with lobby and advocacy trainings. And then now, since last year, together with the Global Fund for Community Foundations, KCDF, and the African Philanthropy Network, we're in a consortium called Giving for Change that is promoting community philanthropy in 8 countries, plus lobbying for legislation in those 8 countries that is conducive to local giving and to civic space. So the Dutch government has ever been interested in this, has created calls for proposals. Not only the Power of Voice, of which Giving for Change is part, but also another program called Voice, in which very small-scale grants are given out all over the world by local partners to very small, really basic CBOs, self-help groups, etc., that promote inclusion. So it is high on the agenda of the ministry. We're trying to get it into the framework of the new minister. We've just had a new minister who's from the more conservative parties, so there's a challenge. But it is on the agenda, and it has ever been so since 2006. Now, I think a big challenge is how to make sure that other bilateral donors are also following this example. Some are doing it. I like the UK government is funding comic relief for a big program on community philanthropy. And some others may also have started, but most of it is just recent. So there is positive change, but still a lot to do. In Germany, for instance, where we have a lot of contacts, as far as we know from these contacts who are highly funded by the German government, the issue is not yet really on the table. And we are discussing now with the Dutch government, with our partners in Giving for Change, but also with the European Commission, the unit for society organizations, local authorities and foundations, how to try to get member states aware of the issue, but also active on the issue. And that's still, I think, a way to go. On the other side of the spectrum, if I look more introspectively, there's also a challenge. There's a big challenge of making sure all the staff within your own organization knows what this is about, and setting aside the idea, what's in it for us? Because that was a question I often got when I first started working in this domain. People, especially from communication and fundraising departments, ask, yes, but what's in it for us? Well, what's in it for us is that we fund and support more relevant projects that are the priority of local people, where people pool resources themselves and fund part or eventually perhaps all of the activities that are priority according to their analysis. So I think that's very important. Secondly, there's also the pressure from private individual donors that support us. In our case, it's 40,000 people. They have been supporting us for the way we supported activities in the Global South in a far more traditional way, starting with brick and mortar projects, as we call them, construction projects. It's very difficult to get these people to convince them that we need to do more structural investments and also investments in system change. If you come from the brick and mortar period and you're still a donor of Wildegansen, it's difficult to explain why now other things are needed. So that's a second hurdle I see. You're asking for hurdles and obstacles. And the third one, I think, is the hurdle that back donors pose on us. So the Dutch government is, as a government, and the civil servants, they're very flexible and they're aware of the issue, but they are dependent also on other tendencies within our society and in European societies. And the tendencies are that parliaments are often very influenced by right-wing political parties who do not give a damn about shifting power. Yeah, they want to shift power to themselves. But the Global South is something that they're not interested in. They're only interested in our own country, the nationalistic. So they tend to raise heaps of questions in parliament about the spending of Dutch foreign aid, which comes through us and others. So in order to defend the ministry against the criticism of these voices in parliament, the ministry has been forced to set whole new rules of regulations and conditions that make life very difficult, not only for us as an intermediary, but more specifically for our partners in the Global South. And then there's the Court of Auditors again that needs to check whether all these new regulations and conditions are being followed. So I think there's a lot of work to do for NGOs and international foundations to lobby with parliaments and courts of auditors within their respective home countries or countries to see whether whether they can change these conditions, which make it impossible or very hard to be flexible and to leave space to southern partners.
Great, thank you so much. So if Jessica was talking about, we've been doing this for a while, it's been happening, look to the women's movement, and the opportunities are there, sort of almost with it, if we could just join forces and do this better together. You're also saying that actually, the importance of moving beyond the institutional ego, what's in it for me? And if the logical extrapolation of shifting power means that some organizations in the global north will look considerably smaller, we have to acknowledge that that's maybe a fact, and also that includes some sort of pain and resistance and reasons for coming back to some of the points that Elizabeth was saying about how capacity is perceived in the Global South. And we know that this has always been a challenge, that Global South organizations lack capacity and therefore other organizations along the way. But what you're also saying, Robert, is unless we organize, and think more like a movement rather than individual organizations, we'll never achieve anything. That we need to think about allyship and how we leverage that. I'm going to come to you, Grace, and then Elizabeth and Mary, I'm going to come to you afterwards. But Grace, where you sit, you know, KCDF was set up 25 years ago. It was an idea that was way before its time. I mean, the idea of local philanthropy for development in a context where there was still huge amounts of international money. You could basically write a proposal and get $200,000 immediately. So why on earth would you go to the trouble of going to communities to convince them that they had resources? And I suppose for KCDF, and my experience of organizations like KCDF is when you're in a conversation like this, and I think Elizabeth made this very clear, this is about relational capital. This is about the trust. This is about leveraging networks. But the danger of an organization like KCDF is that you show up in the system as a conduit, as a tool for others to use. And that everything you do, which is about changing mindsets and bringing people, almost gets lost because you can write a check nicely and make sure a grant is spent properly. How have you wrestled? And I know you joined KCDF relatively recently, so presumably you come with fresh eyes to this. But how does that conversation play out within KCDF? Because you could easily choose to become that intermediary and probably make a nice pretty penny out of it, but you've chosen not to. So could you share some of your reflections and the conversations you've been having within the organization about how you juggle these sort of dual identities, or which identity you wish to assert over the other?
Thank you so much, Jenny. And on a light note, don't we miss those days when we'd write those proposals and get those big checks? On a light note, 9 months ago when I joined KCDF, one thing that Janet Mario was very clear to instill in me and to remind me is that KCDF should never be a conduit for funding. Don't chase the big bucks, for lack of a better word. Keep in mind the communities. And I think for us as an organization, that's what anchors us in our work. Being in touch, being able to have open and honest conversations with the partners that we work with at the community level, even if they're criticizing us, even if they're saying, you don't do this well enough, you don't do that well enough, being able to put aside our ego and our, a perception that we are funding you, so you can't criticize us. We had to be able to put that aside. And how we remain anchored is by being able to question ourselves and even our own thought processes. And just picking up on what Robert said, we have our own biases, even within KCDF, in terms of when we're reviewing a grant proposal and we're thinking, well, that really won't work, Is that really going to be viable? How are we going to capture results? How are we going to be able to demonstrate that we have really, elevated the work that we're doing? But being able to constantly question each other and being able to be anchored in going back to the basics. Why were we set up? We were set up to help and ensure that communities can flourish and they're resilient. We are but a partner. We are just, coming along in this ecosystem to help unlock and spotlight what the communities have, that at times, even they themselves will not count it as what they have. Having a conversation with the organization and saying, we want to put in this amount of money to this project that you've identified. What are you bringing to the table? And them say, no, but that's why we have come to you. We've come to you for resources. And we're saying, you've come to us for financial resources, but there are other resources that you have. You have the expertise in the community level. You have the knowledge in terms of what works. You have the social capital in terms of being able to really galvanize people to have ownership and to believe in the work that you're doing. So as much as possible, we also ensure that any resources we're looking at are resources that benefit the communities ultimately. Right from the board level, right up to anyone who goes and works alongside organizations to assess the systems. We ask ourselves also, to what extent do our systems hamper these organizations that we work with? And how can we absorb some of that pain so that then we are able to really demonstrate the action of this work. So continuously anchoring ourselves. I don't want to give the impression that it's easy, that, you know, it's just something that comes naturally, because of the system and everything that has been built over the years that Jessica and Robert have spoken to. We have continuous mind shift as KCDF and constantly going back to why were we set up? Why are we here? It's not about showing a big, you know, balance sheet or a good audit report showing that we are viable going concern. It's about the communities and putting that front and center. Thanks.
Wonderful, thank you. Yes, so that insistence on measuring other things apart from flows of money, I think, Elizabeth, are you there? Could you put your camera on? Can we come to you? Oh, no, oh, there we go. Hi.
Hi.
Hi, so you've been listening to Jessica and Robert and Grace, and, you know, this idea that actually the more we can join forces and start to see where we have colleagues and allies. So you talked about, you know, challenging global North assumptions, how current work is donor focused. How do you feel like you have the opportunity to take this conversation to larger platforms? Because you clearly have your analysis quite clear that the current system doesn't work and you found an alternative. Do you feel like you have spaces to come to start articulating your view to people sitting in other sides of the world who make big decisions over funding? I'd love to get your perspective on that. Is that a conversation that you have access to at the moment? And I mean, it sounds like you've got a lot to offer to it.
I think that's very clear that I've said it is not just a journey, it is not a sprint, it's just a marathon. And we are getting very clear indications from the funders like USAID, EU. In Kenya, here, if you've been keen on the recent call for proposals, they are emphasizing on the need for matching grants. They are emphasizing on the need for appreciating the affordability of the local community capacities, local community culture, local community skills. That means there is something happening. And we have, as a movement, to continue to appreciate the big donors and funders who have started to take this, the power, shift the power process ahead, but also question our organizations, the local organizations that in Kenya, for example, or in Africa. Are we ready to manage funds which we will be receiving from the global north? Are we prepared for the shift? We may say that we need money, but we don't have the capacities, the absolute capacity to become zero. When we were working on HIV/AIDS some years back, when we had a lot of money on HIV, we were returning the money to the Global Fund because we never had structures to absorb and report that money to the Global Fund. So if the same happens in the development arena, where we have communities now given resources, and communities prepared with clear systems, are also communities prepared to report and also meet the due diligence requirements, what we call funder readiness in terms of the local organizations. And also, we also have to take this message or voice this up to our embassy, foreign agencies and the bilaterals, that the focus on compliance is very easy. The focus on due diligence is very easy. It's just like a procurement kind of work. You tick the box, you delivered this particular document. But effectiveness is one of the challenges that happens in the development work. You have picked and you've given, let's say, $50 million to a multi-international organization. They have ticked all the compliance issues. But when you come back and see how was this money spent, where was the big chunk of money went to, you find that the big chunk of money went to the hotels, it went to logistics of managing your international organization cars, paying per diems, and even paying the salaries. But when you look at what happened at the community, less than 1% was there, and the community agencies like Nguzo Africa are employed as service providers and not true partners in the ecosystem. So it is a conversation that we will continue discussing. I know it is not very good for some organizations, but it is a process which will happen with some time. And we don't want to be oppressive as such, but also we have to be consultative and accommodative in these negotiations.
Brilliant, thank you. But I think that importance of actually negotiating some of these parameters, because as you say, there's a danger if you tick all the boxes for compliance and due diligence, and you're able to administer a USAID grant, for example, to name a funder, the danger is you might stop looking like an organization that is really journeying with and being accountable and engaging communities, right? The danger is that it threatens the essence of what you are, isn't it? So it seems, but you talk about effectiveness, you're saying if this money is to be effective, then it needs to work differently. So I wonder what the opportunities are for trying to negotiate where there might be some flex and some flexibility. If you've got members of your community giving to your organization, to me, that's a pretty strong signifier of accountability. It's not just how you spend somebody else's money, but how a community spends its own money. So I think that, the opportunity to start thinking about how we leverage the assets that we already have in negotiating with funders who want funder effectiveness. And your story reminded me of a story that Monica Matuku used to tell way back at the beginning of KCDF. And she would tell this story about a volunteer came to a village, he built a well, he went away, he came back a year later, the well wasn't working, he was really sad. The community members went, oh, poor man, he's so sad, his well is broken. And he said, but it was your well. And she said, development is the story behind the well, the thing that would make people feel like it was their well. And that had been forgotten in that story. And that idea of the process and the importance of effectiveness being so important. Mary, I wonder if I could come to you. And then we're going to open. I've got a couple more questions before we move into a Q&A. But Mary, I loved your story about, the clear logic. You start out giving food and then you realize that's not going to work. And then you start realizing, okay, well, what's the longer term solution here? And obviously working with the women that you've engaged with who are having access to finance, the importance of control over their resources. And then you said something really, you sort of threw it in and you said, but we've still got to account for them. And how do you think about managing the power dynamics between empowering women to have access to their own resources and the role that you play as the sort of bridge here? Can you talk to us a little bit about the kinds of conversations you have about when you need to stand off and when you need to step forward?
Yeah, well, yeah, that's been a challenge for us. It's something we have always made fun of. Like, it's a risk. We've taken a risk. We are accountable to our donors, but the money is in the women's account, and the women are the signatory to those accounts. And one thing about Living Positive is the fact that we have always emphasized on the issue of being a group that has clearly identified their need. Their need is for mothers that are HIV positive to be able to take care of their children. And whatever resources come through the program has never been looked at as the program's resources. They are resources for the women. A lot of us are members of that particular community, and together that has really, really helped. It's our resources. If we don't manage them well, if we don't help the program manage these resources well, we might not be able to access the resources, or we might not even be able to have the resources. Like, for example, if we don't take care of our chicken, then we have no chicken. And of course, nobody will give you chicken today if the ones they gave you yesterday, you didn't take care of them. I think those are the kind of conversations we've been having around just being accountable, not for the donor, but for ourselves. Right. Not for anybody else, for ourselves. We take care of the program so that tomorrow we have a program. We take care of our resources so that tomorrow we have resources. We take care of each other. It's just about just making sure that everything is done, not for donors, not for anybody else, but for ourselves and our families and our children and our own sustainability and growth. It's everything just being focused. It's for us. It is for us. Whether the donor give them to us, it's for us. Tomorrow we might need that donor. Tomorrow we might need those resources. So for us, it's just the ownership process. It's been really, really like keen on us to help people own up the school. For example, the school, the classrooms we build, we don't guard them. We don't have a watchman. There are things in there. There are computers for the children. But the community knows if then the school is broken into, if things are stolen, if the kitchen is not working, then it's our children who tomorrow will not have a feeding program. Because before when we started, we used to have people breaking and stealing plates and things for the children. But now that the community knows it's our school, the organization will not be there at night, but us as a community are there. So the resources are our own. We are doing these things not for the good of the of the donor, not the international community, not anybody else, but for ourselves. So that's how the conversations go around here, just trying to get everything owned.
So, but what you're saying is that the money is just oils the machinery of the relationships, of the trust. Actually, it's the building the trust and the accountability to each other that kind of is critical. It becomes like a virtuous circle of saying that actually this is how we can be stronger as an us. And we know that often distrust is a huge issue to battle with. So almost like if you build the trust and the accountability, then you create structures on which money can land. You know, it's fertile soil on which seeds can be planted, isn't it? Yeah.
Sure, right, yes.
Wonderful. I've got a couple more questions, which I'm going to throw out and any of you can answer. And then we're going to open it up because I'm trying to warm up the audience so that they start answering questions. So my two questions, and I'm going to put them together so you can opt for one or the other or both. So on this panel today, we're kind of modeling that we've got access to the global conversation. KCDF is sitting in a national position, an East African position, and we've got kind of connection to community action. How do we organize ourselves to take this work forward? If there are enough of us here, how do we start getting better at pulling in the same direction and certainly not competing against each other? So that's one question for you to think over. And then the other one is, how do we make this work for things like human rights and social justice that may be slightly less difficult for a community to come together to build a classroom because everyone sees the value of education. But when we're starting to talk about issues of justice, vulnerable, marginalized groups who are considered outside the mainstream of community, how do we take these values and this emphasis there? So you can choose one of those questions, or you can have a little multifaceted answer. But how do we take this forward, and how do we think about expanding this work so we're really thinking around rights and justice? And I can come for you, or someone can raise their hand. Or we make the mistake of being at the top. Well, there we go, Jessica, thank you.
Thanks, interesting questions. In terms of how to make it work for human rights and social justice, maybe I'll speak to that just because, as you know, the Ford Foundation's sort of mandate is to work with people to end inequality. So it's ultimately a kind of a power-based or social justice-based approach to funding. I mean, one of the things Ford did in 2015 was to launch Build, which was this $1 billion contribution to organizations all across the world. That was just like the purest kind of core funding. The idea that, you know, it was in a way an experiment to say what would happen if you actually gave organizations like a good amount of totally flexible money for them to have space and time to sit back and actually just even reflect on where they're at and what they really need, and then to determine for themselves where they want to invest that money in order to really create institutions that have resilience. And it could be at any level, you know, it could be around finances, which is critical, but also governance, things about relationship to community, and whatever it is they felt that they needed. And that commitment has just been renewed again with another $1 billion. Ford is in a position to do that because it has an endowment, but it also then decided to use the flexibility it had itself to see if it could create a little bit more space in the system. So, you know, one of the things that is harder actually in human rights and social justice is that the outcomes, it's rare to achieve victory. You know, it's rare to achieve an outcome in a year. And in a way, the logic of funding on short-term projects makes the least sense actually in that space, because, you know, trying to shift, you know, towards democratic process, trying to encourage social norm change in a deep way, you know, at population level, these are things that can't happen in 2 years, you know. And so it is actually really critical that we acknowledge that and fund into it. The last thing I would say is just that it's interesting that if you look at participatory grant making, so many of the participatory grant makers actually represent communities who are structurally marginalized. And there's a reason for that, you know, because I think people also realized that they needed to be able to exert greater agency to ensure that they weren't erased constantly from conversations because people making decisions about financing didn't see them. And that lastly, I would say that the idea with the participatory is also its own form of accountability. So, you know, Mary's speaking about that whole thing of we're doing it for us and just recentering the gaze or the intention in the work in terms of thinking about, yes, of course, people have given us money and we will honor that and we will report about it. But ultimately, the priority in terms of what we're trying to do is to make sure that we make the change we set out to do. And so the participatory mechanism also allows for that, because amongst ourselves, like community is not a neutral space. Power, inequality, conflict, you know, that happens everywhere. So even in community, a participatory approach allows us to actually hold ourselves accountable and creates a structure that actually enables that. And I think that's also very healthy too.
Great, thank you, Jessica. That, yeah, let's not over-romanticize communities. Communities are complex, complicated places. But that whole, you know, not everyone has the same resources as the Ford Foundation, but the philosophy of build, don't buy. If you're always buying short-term projects, you're never going to build anything. I mean, there are ways that other kinds of funders can adopt that same thinking. Thank you so much for that. Robert, you've raised your hand. Over to you.
Thank you, Jenny. I'd like to elaborate a bit on the other question. Are there enough of us here? And how do we avoid competition? I think the answer to your question is yes and no. Are there enough of us here? Yes, there are, because we have been able with just a hand group of people, and this is historically so, just a hand group of people or a hand group of organizations able to change the course of history, provided they stick together, they are courageous, and they really have something to say. And I think the debate that has been started on shifting the power and on community philanthropy and on localization is there to stay. This will not end. What I'm seeing is that more and more INGOs are aware of the fact that something needs to change. They often may even feel a bit guilty that they haven't changed as yet, or haven't changed sufficiently as yet. But I also see that they're asking for advice. They're seeking our advice, your advice, Jenny, as you and many others. KCDF is being asked, how can we change? And I think it's one of our duties to invest time and energy into trying to reach out to ever more other organizations that have money, that are influential. At the INGO level, at the level of international foundations, but also at the level of bilateral and multilateral agencies.
Thank you. Yeah, the time is right and the opportunity is now. And the danger is, as we know, that if Shift the Power just becomes a fad and something doesn't work, people will go, oh, that didn't work, we're moving on to the next thing. So really keeping this front and central becomes really, really critical. Thank you, Robert. Grace, over to you.
And sharing our successes.
Sharing our successes, yeah, absolutely, absolutely.
I think how we can, as a movement, really move away from seeing that we're in competition with each other is to shift our focus, shift our gaze in terms of the needs within communities, and the challenges that are there everywhere in the world are so grave. So moving our mindset from, well, there's only very little for us to have, to there's a lot of work for us to do. And how can we then really be in solidarity with each other to get this work done. I would say that is a key thing for us to do. And being able to be very candid and honest in terms of where we're struggling. If we are able to say, this is where I'm struggling, who can help me along with this? That it's not then seen as, okay, so that's your weak point, that's where I'm going to then knock you down. When it comes to the conversation around rights and justice and, galvanizing communities to see the importance of this work, I think it just goes back to what you said, that communities are diverse. When it comes to rights and justice work, we are literally, unbreaking or changing power, whether depending on those who are holding power would not want to release power. So even the appreciation that that work is a lot harder to do, and that even the perception that communities would have because of certain work you're doing has been narrated by those who are in power. So let me make it simpler. A few years ago in Kenya, there was this whole conversation that a lot of governance, civil society organizations were being labeled as evil society, not civil society. And just recently, we had citizens asking, where are those civil society organizations? Where are they to help us in the challenges that we're having? So being able to be understanding the nuances around how framing is done even of civil society, and being able to start deconstructing that conversation. But let's realize that it's not that the cake is too small. I mean, we have the entire kitchen, that's the whole world. There's a lot for us to do. Thanks.
Thank you, Grace. I love that idea that actually there is an abundance of assets. And oh yes, there is also a kind of a fact that the humanitarian system has committed to get more than the 4% of money that goes directly to the global south. And I think it's important that we don't lose sight of that still most international money continues to go through northern actors and very little of it trickles down to the grassroots. So that's one object of advocacy. But this other idea that what we have in abundance is each other, energies, ideas coming together to be nimble, to strategize, to theorize. When do we send Grace to a meeting? When do we send Mary? When does Robert go in? And to start thinking more like a movement. Elizabeth, you raised your hand. Over to you.
I can just comment on how to amplify this movement. One of the ways in this movement, and also encourage organizations who are in this network to apply the ideas of the Shift to the Power movement, and also encourage and educate communities on the key essentials, on the key manifesto, the Shift to the Power manifesto, so that information can reach to the communities so that they can change. On the aspect of social justice and how the communities can apply it, I think one thing we must agree that the public has a sixth sense of detecting insincerity. When you are sincere, the public can see that you are sincere. I have a case in our side that when we were seeking the government to do two things, somebody said, how can we pay you to do this work? How can you pay you to tell the government to do a certain load? So it means there's opportunity if we can package that, the work we do in social justice, and say this is what we do. We need your support as a public to make our governors work. We need your support to amplify the voice on corruption, to amplify the voice on mismanagement of public funds. I am sure there are Kenyans who can be able to give you money to facilitate you to do the work, because they know if you are sincere and if you have told your stories clearly that this is what you do and they have seen you deliver, there will be no trouble for the local communities giving you that assignment. But if there is any minimal doubt on what you do, and if they see you that you are associated with the big funding and big money, they think that your work is to receive money from the outside, not to help them, but to show the other side of the world. So it's about packaging our response. There are opportunities for us to do work in social justice, and there are opportunities for even our citizens to support the work if we do it perfectly and package it very perfectly.
Thank you, Elizabeth. I think that's so important, the kind of how do we reframe and reclaim the narrative. You mentioned if you look on the shifttopower.org site, I put there the link to the Manifesto for Change, which Elizabeth mentioned. But that whole issue of sometimes we NGOize our work so much, so badly, that it actually pushes people away. You know, we talk about the capacitation of the facilitation of the what, you know, so how do we actually turn this back into things that really matter to people, and so that they are enter into this conversation as participants, not being on the receiving end of technical jargon that means nothing to them. And I think the development space has been really very good or very bad, according to how you see it at that. Just want to turn to Mary. Mary, do you have any reflections on what you've heard on either of those questions? Is there anything you want to add? And then we're going to open it up. I see that there are some questions in the chat to turn to, but Mary, over to you.
Not really, but for us, I just want to say this is a process. It is a process we are all learning together. There are a lot of challenges that we have to go unfolding every day, but it's a process that for some of us that have experiences, we think it's a better way of doing things. It's a better way of doing things. We just want to keep encouraging. For us, it's more encouraging. It's encouraging the communities to embrace it. It's encouraging the community to look at it, because even this COVID area has taught us a number of things. Most of the organizations closed and went home, and the communities were left in their own communities. So if they didn't have ways of sorting out their own challenges, the organizations were not there, and people are able to come up and to live. Ideally, is the communities have to continue living. The communities have to be there. Their issues will always be there. Issues will be there within communities. It's for communities to learn how to sort out those and come up and ask people for the gaps and see how they can partner with people. So it's just a process that people have to hold on and keep encouraging one another and keep working on it until it becomes the normal, until it becomes the usual way of sorting out problems, until it becomes the right way. And I'm happy that KCDF has taken a lead in this one. This one, I think for us, we are experiencing it, of course, with a lot of challenges, but we are liking it as a better way. It's a better way.
Thanks, Mary. And I think, you know, the whole world is at this sort of moment where the danger is that we all forget what happened during COVID. The fact that during COVID, as you say, it was grassroots organizations, it was those who were known and trusted in the community who responded. And as we return back to normal, the danger is that somehow we forget that. So how do we take that essence and keep it front and central to what we do and build from that, rather than retreat into old patterns and old habits? I want to acknowledge Monica Matuku, who is here, but under a pseudonym, but she sent a message saying that she's here. So welcome, Monica. It's lovely to have you here. And I hope I represented your story correctly in the spirit of true accountability and wasn't misrepresenting your words of the story behind the well. We have, I'm just turning to my timekeeper, Natasha. I think we have another 20 minutes, do we, for some Q&A, and I can see there's some questions in the chat. Is that right, Natasha?
Yes, Jenny, please proceed.
Okay, good. So I'm going to come to some questions in the chat, but let's just, Natasha, are people able to speak, or must I read them out, the questions?
You'll have to read them out.
I'll have to read them out. So we've got one question around the shrinking space for civil society and talking about shifting power, and how do we really kind of think about this. I know in some countries where we partner, our partners don't use the language of shifting power, even if they use the philosophy of it, because everyone is so terrified that governments will think it's about them. So how do we start kind of taking this spirit of doing development differently and more effectively? And how does that relate to the context of the shrinking space? And this is for anyone to raise their hand and jump in on. Go on, Robert.
Yes, I think one of the reasons why it's relatively easy for governments to shrink the space for civil society organizations is that often civil society organizations in the global south, but also in our country sometimes in the north, can be framed as very dependent on foreign aid, and therefore spokeswomen or men for foreign governments. In Russia, you have to register as a foreign spy even. You have to call yourself a foreign spy if you want to receive foreign funding. This is a trend that's happening in most countries of the world, perhaps with slightly different words. But what I feel is very societies, organizations in the global south to diversify their funding, to become less dependent on international funding and raise more funding, and not only funding but also other forms of support, including increasing their constituencies, to show to governments we really are legitimate. We do represent voices of people in our own country. We're not dependent on from abroad. We're dependent on people in our country. We represent them, and we have a right to speak out for them and with them.
Thanks, Robert. Well, that critical point that it's sort of the autocrat's handbook. It's the easiest thing in the world is to point out civil society being not legitimate because it's dependent on international funding and the agendas of outsiders. And so that role of community resourcing really about being constituents, and it kind of goes back to the same story of the well. If an organization is closed down or threatened with it, its constituents should step forward and say, no, this is our organization. It's not, doesn't belong to another government. And so how do we get more of that dynamic? And I can see people are answering questions and asking and answering questions in the chat. Irungu, you're able to actually join into the conversation. There are a couple of questions in the chat about the INGO and the role of kind of publics in other parts of the world. Do you want to jump in? I think you're well placed to have a view on this.
I have absolutely no experience of any of these organizations to speak of, but no, I mean, I think, I think there is a reckoning. I mean, there is a power reckoning with regards to large international organizations that have been much too comfortable receiving preferred funding arrangements from their host governments. The governments are increasingly right-wing and mercurial or even commercial and geopolitical in the way that they think of the world, and therefore have really no interest in poverty and let cause some breeding ground for Al-Shabaab or something like that. I mean, I'm being a bit dismissive, but I do think that the world has shifted away from this idea that there is a global poverty issue to resolve. And therefore, I think for organizations like we have to defend, the concept of individual contribution at the basis of the work. And for those of us working in these international organizations in the global south, I think we have to do what is uncomfortable, which is to start seeing ourselves as the organizations that exist in the global north, right? So what I often say is that until Kenyans can fund human rights work, can support Amnesty International Kenya in Kenya, our work is not done. I mean, there's no shortage of Swedish, Dutch, English, American men and women that would want to fund our work in Kenya. But until I can get Kenyans to do this work, we have a resilience model that is dependent on this country. I've not done my work yet. So I think that's a challenge for those of us in the international space. And I really, for those of you not in that space, I really urge you to challenge us, push us. And when we try and pass on these bilateral policies and procedures, push back against them and just rebel.
Okay, right from the horse's mouth. I hope everyone heard their instructions from Irungu there. There's a question here around, they keep moving, you're all being so efficient at answering them. This issue around language, and Grace, you responded. So someone's saying language is a huge barrier. We need to go beyond. Shift the power does not work for the country where we want to see communities taking charge. Are there other ways of expressing this? And Grace, you responded in the chat, but do you want to say something about that?
Yes, in our conversations, even within the Shift the Power movement, conversations around community foundations, philanthropy, one of the things we have recognized is that in various jurisdictions, we do not use these words. They're not even translatable into local language, and they're not the way probably those who practice it every day understand it. And so there's a continual recognition that we must call things as we see them where we are. So for instance, in Kenya, philanthropy is used in particular spaces, But giving is something that people understand. You're giving, you're helping, you're assisting, that's understood. So even with Shift the Power, the focus is not on the tagline, it's on the principles, it's on the effect, it's on the outcomes of it. And so we want as much as possible not to get lost in words, but they bind us together, yes, but what do they mean where we are? So it's being able to see that. And colleagues in India are doing this, in Palestine, in Brazil, across the globe, some of them are here, are looking at that and looking at language and what does it mean? So like even for Community Foundation, it's not something that is known or understood in very many parts of the world, but we understand that the principle of it in terms of communities raising resources to address issues at the local level is well appreciated. So being able to look at the meaning behind the name. Thanks.
That's so true, isn't it? It's the same with community philanthropy. I mean, you can either look at it as a sort of disruptive notion that you're taking people who are together and associating with a word that we've come to associate with elite, wealthy, hugely wealthy, but this sort of actually love of humankind, mutuality, reciprocity, bought by and with community, however that is defined. Similarly, so we're talking about really containers in which we can hold conversations about power and resources and things, rather than you talking about one thing and I'm talking about it and we're meaning completely different things. So that idea of by essence, we know it when we see it kind of thing becomes really important. On this call in the Philippines today, I'd had a call about 6 months ago with a colleague who said the term community philanthropy doesn't really work in the Philippines. And then on this webinar today, they would 4 different kind of terms or turns of phrase which worked in the Philippines, which all had aspects of it. And it was like, oh no, but we have all of these things, we just don't call it that. And I think that goes back to it, is no one is trying to push new language, because new language doesn't mean anything. It's just a way for us to actually come together. So I think we've got to be really, really careful about that. Jessica.
Thanks. I wanted to respond to Lucy's question about that's in the Q&A. That's in relation to bilaterals, this idea that, Parliament's appropriate development aid from taxpayers, and that the attitudes of taxpayers in the global north towards development aid are generally negative. And so what can we do to change this in order to then see bilaterals being more flexible? A few things about that. So firstly is that all of these narratives are constructed, and actually the pushback against funding development assistance is largely led by right-wing actors in countries with development assistance. Some of it is racist, some of it is just nationalist, and it's organized. And so it is possible to change those narratives. And actually within the countries, a lot of people are working to do that where there is a negative view. I would say that it's not actually necessarily majority negative. It shifts depending on what's going on. And like I said, about the level of mobilization of citizens to, feel this way or that way about development assistance. There are a lot of countries in Europe, for example, where there's pretty significant populations of people that come from Asia or Africa or Latin America living there, who are also citizens, whose money also goes to this. And so they are less likely to have a view that actually this is not it. There are also people from leftist movements in particular in donor countries who understand this as an essential form of solidarity, even reparation. Recognizing that actually the reasons that the countries are dominant economically now is because they colonized, right, and usurp the resources of the very places that they're now funding into. And so there are also citizens who understand that and feel that actually it's their duty then to find some way to do it. So I would just say there's a broad range of opinion, actually. But what shifts it is organized efforts to shift it. And so I think the other thing too is that, look, I mean, whenever you give money, it's rare for any of us, even in our private lives, it's rare to give money in particular, because it's so hard to come by, and not expect some degree of accountability. The question is not to not have accountability. I think the question is to really move the focus away from this obsession with counting, or with obsession with finding a way to feel more certain about what you're doing by forcing people into sort of odd small boxes of ways that, you're trying to gain control and to understand, to say, okay, if we can just count. If you just tell me the number of beneficiaries and how much they reach, then we can calculate the value for money, and then we can do this, and then we can do that, right? It's a control mechanism. I'm not sure that it actually directly leads us, to that, as was said earlier, to effectiveness per se. So it's in a way, it's almost like a technical thing that we need to intervene in, and to say, in terms of the technical approaches to how we do this, is this really the best way? Lastly, I would just say that, again, aid, bilateral donors, their approach to what they're doing depends on the politics of the moment. So if you have progressive governments in power, they can be easier. If you have, conservative governments in power, they can be problematic. And I think it's also, again, just to sort of, understand that changes too. But I think there's some kind of interesting examples of bilaterals really keen to fund things that are more creative. It's just that in broader view, we still have this issue of, again, this concern about control, almost like a concern, an over concern, that doesn't always enable them, even themselves, to understand the impact and effectiveness of what they're doing.
Thanks, Jessica. I've just put it in the link from Common Cause Foundation research that sort of shows that actually people do come together more around sort of core values, and there is greater consensus. But as you say, Jessica, the opportunity is to split and divide. And I think collectively, some of the work we've been doing around Shift the Power is trying to mobilize the demand side of systems change. So how do we get better at making arguments to left-wing governments and right-wing governments? Because we know there's a narrative that works. One is around pulling ourselves up by our bootstraps and the road to self-reliance. This aid stuff isn't going to last forever amongst more kind of right-leaning governments. And as Jessica said, to more left-leaning governments, the narrative around reparations, and we owe the world this, and this is the right thing to do, and this is kind of the global solidarity act. So I think just getting better with our messaging, and probably sharing that amongst ourselves, so that we go with speaking points. We know what it is we say that might resonate in one way or another. Just in the last few minutes, we've got 5 minutes before we must wind up, and I'll hand back to Caesar. So I just wanted to invite the panelists to kind of share any reflections on this conversation, any nice words they'd like to say about KCDF and what it should be doing for the next 25 years. But yeah, just thinking about this kind of, this conversation, I think, has really showed up very nicely how joined up a conversation this is, and how it needs to be engaged at the hyper-local level, but also to be kind of present in global policy discussions too, and how actually the more we work together and can see each other, the more effective we'll be in bringing about change. So Mary, do you have any final reflections on the conversation? Any words you'd like to say to KCDF on this auspicious day?
Just to say thank you for the opportunity. It's been awesome. It's been a journey. We're learning. We feel very, very supported. We've been around to experience and to make mistakes and to be helped to understand. So I just want to say thank you very much, and also this opportunity. So it's really nice to be in this panel, and to all of you, and to listen to people's view. It's a learning process for all of us. So thank you so much.
Thank you, and we're all learning together, so it's great to have your very concrete example and stories to locate that in these bigger, sometimes dangerously abstract conversations if we're not careful. So thank you so much for your contribution. Robert, what about you?
Yes. Well, first of all, I hope KCDF will spend another 5 years being a forerunner in the field of community philanthropy and shifting power. I trust they do. But I'd like to share a challenge that not only applies to KCDF, but also to other national NGOs within the Global South, because I think the trend will be that over the next decade or so, INGOs and multilateral donors will shift power. They will actually do shift power from the Global North to the Global South, but it will tend to concentrate on those national NGOs that have already the capacity to handle huge amounts of funding, that are well rooted in civil society in their own country, but because it's the easiest way to shift power, it's also the easiest way to localize international development assistance or aid. But the danger is that national NGOs like KCDF and in other countries as well become copies of what we NGOs, the Global North, have been like ever since, not ever since we started, but have become over time, because it's a development. So I'd like to invite and challenge KCDF to reflect on this danger. And I know you're reflecting on it already, but keep it high on your agenda. How can we transfer money, continue to transfer money, not money, it's power, I mean, money is power, but it's only part of it, to local communities.
Thanks, Robert. Yeah, how do we avoid just moving same old power from London or New York or Geneva to Nairobi and saying we've shifted it? Phew, it's Kenyan now. Wonderful. Elizabeth, any concluding thoughts, inspiration for us?
First of all, I must congratulate KCDF and the Power Movement partners for making us, even us, to learn about this particular concept, because we did not know about it. But we know it is something which is workable, something which is sustainable. It's something which we need to continue talking about. And also, we need to look it up. How can we change it at the policy level? How can we change it at the policy level in a sense that bilateral organizations cannot maximize on the lack of capacities, so that they can concentrate on the issues and also give capacities to local organizations so that they can do what they're supposed to do. And also we correlate, so we don't have to be enemies with the bilateral, so that this agenda moves. It's about how can we work better, how can we work good, how can we minimize wastage, how can we add value to the work we do in the communities. I think that's the major essence. We're not fighting anybody, but we want to see how can we make our development work effective to the people and the communities we serve.
Wonderful. So loud and clear, we have to start with ourselves. We can't wait for other people to do things and for them to shift power and only focus on that. We actually have to start to think about our practices, the way we work, the way we organize, the way we reflect our values at the same time. Jessica, over to you, and then Grace, hand over to you to give us the final word. Jessica.
Thank you. Well, just to say again, really a happy birthday. I mean, it's really significant to live for 25 years in this world as an organization. And I know that the Ford Foundation was, integral to the creation of KCDF. And that effort was also led in part by, really visionary African staff working in Ford, who are also really keen to see the growth of South-based philanthropy, and particularly in Africa. So it's really beautiful to see this. It's a model. It's something to learn with, learn from, and really wishing you many more years of this. I mean, I think it's really also wonderful to have spaces that can host and convene these kinds of conversations that just give a different vision and a different understanding of what resourcing change looks like, and also makes visible the fact that in our communities, as we always say, people have always been philanthropic, people have always funded in solidarity. And so you're providing a platform to make that even more visible, and to show how, those ways of doing things can be also inspirations for new ways, and for models that can be shared in other spaces. So in many respects, it's just, a congratulations, and, wishing you well. And to all of the people who have also contributed to your work, who are partners in it, like Elizabeth and Mary, to really say, change in the world is done by us, actually. And so the most fundamental shift in power is taking back that agency, or claiming or acknowledging that agency, and recognizing that if we want things to change, then we are the ones who have to do it.
Wonderful. Thank you, Jessica. And I think it's also important to say, Ford has accompanied this process, not just as a funder, but also as a thought leader. Like, this is hard work. It requires lots of people coming together, doing their best thinking. And so the more we do that together, I'm sure the better our outcomes will be. Grace, let me give the final word to you, reflecting on today's conversation. There are people asking for virtual cake. I'm not sure how you're going to manage that. So anyway, I'm just saying. Over to you, Grace.
Thank you so much, Jenny, and to all the panelists for such rich input, and also for the questions which have been thought-provoking and challenging as well. The cake will be there for those of you who will be in Nairobi on the 18th of March at Karen Country Club, where we'll be golfing for good. So look out for details around that. So I'm looking forward to Stigmata coming over so that we can enjoy the cake together. I think it's important for us to take on the challenge. It's a lot easier to drive local philanthropy, like we've said, around development work. How do we ensure that we put the same thought and leadership around social justice issues? So that for us is the challenge. We want to be able to invite people to think through these things with us, and for us to dare. Even the concept of KCDF was, as Jessica said, it was so big, it was something that no one would have thought is possible. So we must be able to take that step and that leap of faith, and to dare and to think and to push the boundaries. So I invite all of you who are on this call to join us through this. We don't always get it right, but that is the beauty of Shift the Power. You make mistakes, you pick yourself up. It's an opportunity to learn and to be able to then improve on that. So thank you very much, and looking forward to pushing more boundaries.
Wonderful, wonderful. Thank you so much. And I think that last point, Grace, so the more we carry each other, we can afford to make mistakes if it's just one of us. The rest of us carry the others. So we learn together. It's not we wait and watch you fail and we go, ha, ha, ha. This is what movement building is about, is being able to carry each other and work together in as a movement and in solidarity with each other. Thank you so much for your wonderful input. Thank you so much for the great questions and the active chat during this. I'm going to hand over to Caesar now. Caesar Ngule is going to close us out for the day.
Yes, thank you, Jenny. And really, just because of time, allow me to go straight to the point and to take this opportunity to thank everyone for participating in this webinar, taking your time, engaging with questions. We appreciate you. Also allow me to thank our very able team of panelists and facilitators, Eliza Fan, Mary, Grace, Robert, Jessica, Jenny, and Irungu. You've represented KCDF very well in the conversations. And special thanks, of course, to KCDF board members and trustees, all KCDF staff members who spend a lot of time in making this possible. Former staff members who have been part of this journey, Monica, Janet, among others, our community partners who are here, past and present, we thank you. We can't be KCDF without you. Our funders, both corporate, institutional funders and individuals, we appreciate your contribution and your commitment to the mission and vision of KCDF over the years. The constant being that it's a pursuit for resilient, happy communities that are giving and working together in prosperity. So like Grace has said, we have the golfing event on 28th, look out for it. But also we have an exciting webinar coming up on the 27th of April, focusing on experience sharing around financial sustainability. So we thank you very much. God bless you. You can exit. And Natasha can play some background music for us. Thank you.
you.